We begin on Daf Mem Tes Amud Aleph. The first word on the line is Itztaba, where it says Boy Rav Papa. The Gemara continues with a series of ibayas that Rav Papa asked regarding the halachas of chafina and kemitza. Chafina done with the ketairas and Yom Kippur, the handfuls that the Kohen brought into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and the kemitza, which is done with the Karban Mincha and the Beis HaMikdash. So this is the final question of Rav Papa regarding the chafina. By Rav Papa asked the following question: Chafan chaveiroi, if another Kohen took the handful of the ketairas and then v'nosan l'toich chafnov, and he placed it into the handful of the Kohen Gadol. Mahu, what's the halacha? Is this acceptable? Meloi chafnov be'inon v'ha'ike. Is it that the Torah requires that you have the full handful of the Kohen Gadol, and you have that here? Because now the Kohen Gadol has the handful of the ketairas in his hands. Or perhaps v'lokach v'hevi be'inon, he has to take and bring, and the word v'lokach means that there's an action that he has to do. The mitzvah of the Kohen Gadol is not only to bring in the handful of ketairas into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but the ma'aseh, the action of doing the chafina, is part of his mitzvah, v'lokach, and that you don't have. He did not do the chafina, v'holeke. Teiku, this remains a question. Tosfos here points out that the Gemara before had a similar question regarding a person, a Kohen Gadol, that does the chafina, and between his fingers he had some of the ketairas that were stuck there, and it just came along with the ketairas that he has in his handful, whether that's part of it, or because it comes along on its own, so therefore it's not part of the velokach. But Tosfos says, here the Gemara asks the question again, because here it's a slightly different question. Before, we were talking about pieces of the ketairas that came along between your fingers, and the Kohen did not at all do any action to bring them, it just came along. Here we're talking about a case that somebody did do the action of the chafina. Another Kohen did this action of the chafina. This Kohen Gadol that's bringing it into the Kodesh HaKadoshim didn't do it. And therefore here the Gemara has the question, do we say that it has to be the same Kohen that's doing the chafina, that he has to do the action of the chafina, place it in his hands, and he has to be the same one to bring it into Kodesh HaKadoshim? The Gemara continues another question that Rabbi Shua ben Levi asked. Boy, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, chafan umeis. The Kohen Gadol did the chafina of the ketairas and placed it into the kaf, into the ladle that was used to bring it into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and then he passed away. Maho sheikones acher b'chafinosei. Can now the other Kohen Gadol that's taking his place use this ketairas, and the chafina was already done by the previous Kohen Gadol? Could he now use it and take it into the Kodesh HaKadoshim even though he did not do any chafina? Amar Rav Chanina. So when Rav Chanina heard this question, he said to his students, Boy ure'ei, come and see Shailas HaRishayim, the question of Rabbi Shua ben Levi from the previous generations. What he was saying is that I asked this question, as Rashi says, Rabbi Shua ben Levi was saying, I asked this question, and come and see that in the previous generation they asked the same question as I asked you. So the Gemara asks on this, Lemeimre, should we say that this means that Rabbi Shua ben Levi koshish, that Rabbi Shua ben Levi was from an earlier generation, he was older than Rab Chanina, and therefore he's saying, look, Rabbi Shua ben Levi already asked this question? But that we learned that it's the opposite. Rabbi Shua ben Levi said, Li hite Rab Chanina lishtois shachalayim. Rab Chanina permitted for me to drink on Shabbos, b'Shabbos, the shachalayim, a drink that's from cress, and it's used to drink also for purposes of a person that's ill, to heal him, and he allowed him to drink this shachalayim on Shabbos. Even usually there's a gzeira of Chazal not to do anything that is to have medicines that a person is drinking or eating on Shabbos, but he allowed him to drink this cress. So we see here that Rabbi Shua ben Levi asked by Rabbi Chanina this question. Rabbi Chanina allowed him to do this on Shabbos. So Rabbi Chanina must have been older than him. Now, the Gemara is going to go through this sugya, exactly what Rabbi Chanina paskened for him, and then we'll come back to our discussion over here regarding the question that Rabbi Shua ben Levi asked and Rabbi Chanina asked regarding the chafina. So the Gemara asks, Lishtais, he allowed him to drink shachalayim on Shabbos. Pshita, obvious. The Tnan, there's a mission that says, Kala oichlin, all kinds of foods, oichel adam l'refuah. You're allowed to eat on Shabbos for the purpose of healing yourself. V'chol amashkin, and all kinds of drinks. Sheisa, you're allowed to drink on Shabbos as well. So even though you're not allowed to take any medicines on Shabbos and so on, because there's a gzeira, you might come to grind it. But if it's foods that are usually eaten by healthy people, and the same thing with drinking, so then you're allowed to eat or drink that, even if you're doing it for the purpose to heal yourself. So what was the heter that Rab Chanina gave to Rabbi Shua ben Levi? Ella, therefore the Gemara says, Lishchayk v'lishtais shachalayim b'Shabbos. He gave him a heter to both grind it and drink it on Shabbos. So on this the Gemara asks, Hey Chidami, what's the case here? If it's a case where his life is in danger, Mishri Shari, then it's obvious that it's allowed. And if his life is not in danger, Meiser Aser, so then it's forbidden. So there'd be no heter in this. Where's the case that he had to give him a special heter? So the Gemara answers, La'olam de'ikeh sakanta. Really, the case over here is that there's a sakana, his life was in danger, and therefore it would be allowed to grind this and drink it on Shabbos. But he was asking him not a question of halacha, but he was asking him the question from a health perspective. Is this actually effective? Mimasye, does this actually heal the neichel alaya Shabbata, and therefore we should desecrate Shabbos and grind it and prepare it? Or it does not heal. And therefore we should not desecrate Shabbos to prepare this. Why did he ask this question from Rabbi Chanina? Because Rabbi Chanina was proficient in all kinds of medicines and healings and so on. Where do we see this? The Amar Rabbi Chanina said, no one has ever asked me a question about a case where he got a blow from a white mule and he survived such a blow and he remained alive. That's what he once commented. So we see from this that people were accustomed asking him questions regarding questions of medicine and when they were sick. Now the Gemara comments regarding this statement that Rab Chanina said that no one ever got healed from the blow of a white mule. We see that people survive a blow of a white mule. So the Gemara says, Eime v'choyes. What he meant to say is he never saw a wound from a white mule that was healed. That's not that no one didn't survive, but the wound of a white mule does not heal. That again the Gemara asks, V'chachazina de mitzi. We see that a wound from a white mule that injured you does heal. So the Gemara says it's a specific kind of mule. Besumkan inu v'chivron reish karayu. This is a mule which is a white mule, and the tips of its feet are. It is actually a red mule, that is. Besumkan inu. They are red mules, and the tips of its feet are white. Kamrina, that's what we're talking about. Okay, so this concludes this story here, where we see that Rabbi Shua ben Levi got a heter to drink this cress on Shabbos from who? From Rab Chanina. So what do we see from this? Either way, what we see from this whole incident is that Rab Chanina koshish. Rab Chanina was older than Rabbi Shua ben Levi, so he couldn't have said that look what Rabbi Shua ben Levi in an earlier generation asked, similar to what I asked. Ela hachikama. So rather we must say that this is what Rab Chanina said. Sha'altan kisheila shal rishayim. That the sha'alasan, their question, the question of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, is the same question as was already asked in an earlier generation, referring to himself, that he was from an earlier generation and he already asked this question about the case of a kohen that did the chafina and then he died, whether another kohen can take it over without doing the chafina over again. On this the Gemara now asks, could it be that Rab Chanina asked this question? But Rab Chanina said regarding the par, the bull that the kohen gadol has to bring on Yom Kippur, it has to be yours, the kohen gadol's bull, and he can't use the blood of a bull. Meaning, if there was one kohen gadol that had shechted this par and then passed away, and another kohen gadol that's taking him over wants to use the blood of this par to bring it to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he can't. He has to shecht over again his own par. That's what Rab Chanina said regarding the par. And now, V'amar Rab Chanina also said regarding the ketayres, shechafna koidim shchites apar. The ketayres, you took the handful of the ketayres before you shechted the par, leyasav klum, it's out of order, and what you've done is worthless. So if so, what happened over here? If this kohen that did the chafina passed away, so now you're going to have to shecht over the par. The new kohen gadol taking him over can't use the blood from the par of the kohen gadol that passed away. So he has to shecht over the par again. And if he does have to do that, so then he has to do the chafina over again. Otherwise, it's going to be out of order. So it can't be that Rab Chanina asked the question whether the kohen gadol could use the chafina of a previous kohen gadol. He can't. It's going to be out of order. So the Gemara says, so we have to change what Rab Chanina said. Hachi ka'amar, this is what Rab Chanina commented. Since Rabbi Shua ben Levi has a question, whether the new kohen gadol could use the chafina of the previous kohen gadol that passed away, Homeklal, from this I can see the kasava bepar vafila bedamei shel par, that the new kohen gadol could use the blood of the par from the previous kohen gadol. He doesn't have to shecht it over again. When the Torah says the par, it could even be just the blood of the par. And therefore now he has a question regarding the chafina, whether you have to take the handful of the Torah again, or you could use it from the previous kohen gadol. Ulamai the svirele, and according to his opinion that you could use the blood of the par, sheilasai k'sheilasai rishayim. His question is like the question that was already asked in an earlier generation by those that argued with Rab Chanina regarding the subject of the par, whether you have to have a new par or you could just use the blood of the par. And those that argued with Rab Chanina and said that the new kohen gadol does not have to shecht over again, he could use the blood of the previous par, they already asked this question regarding the chafina as well, whether the kohen gadol has to do over the chafina or he could use the chafina of the previous kohen gadol. That's what Rab Chanina commented. So now, my havi Allah. What's the answer to this question according to their opinion? Rav Papa says this will depend on another question. So now the question is, do you do chafina twice? What this is referring to is, we spoke about the chafina, you take the handful of the ketores from the shovel of the ketores outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now the question is, when you come inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and you have to put the ketores into the pan of coals where the fire is, so the smoke will come out. So how do you put it into that pan? One opinion is, as we'll see soon, the Gemara will discuss this, one opinion is that you just pour it directly from the kaf, from the ladle that has that ketores, into the pan. But another opinion says, no, you do the chafina a second time. You have to take from the ladle and place it back into your handful, and then pour from your handful back into the coals, into the fire. So do you do the chafina 2 times? That's the question here. So now again, so the Gemara says, Rav Papa said as follows: if you do the chafina once outside and then you do the chafina a second time inside in the Kodesh Kodashim, so then we can say regarding our question whether a new kohen gadol can take over the ketores that the previous kohen gadol already did the chafina, chaveidai nichnas b'chafinasai. The second kohen gadol can take this ketores that the previous kohen gadol that died did the chafina. Why? D'hamekayme chafina. He will fulfill the mitzvah of chafina when he's inside in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now that's if you do the chafina a second time. However, if the chafina is only done once outside, and then inside you pour it directly from the ladle, from the kaf, into the fire, and you don't do chafina again, so then tepoyelach. So then your question will remain a question: could the new kohen gadol take it in, and he never ends up doing the mitzvah of chafina? The Torah says that he should take malay chafnov, so he never did it. So that's a question whether he could rely on the fact that the previous kohen gadol did it. So Rav Huna tells to Rav Papa that said that it's dependent on this question whether you do chafina twice or not. Adarabba, you're right, it's dependent on that question, but to the contrary, if the chafina is done once outside, and then when you come into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you have to take again from the ladle back into your handful, you do the chafina second time. So then, lo yikonis ache b'chafinasai. The second kohen gadol cannot take over this ladle that the chafina was already done and then do the chafina inside. Why not? Because it's impossible that the handfuls of the 2 kohanim gedolim should be the exact same. So either it's going to be too little for the size of the new kohen gadol's hands, or it's going to be too much, and it has to be exact, meloi chafnav exact, or has to be rounded off, as the Gemara said before, but it has to be meloi chafnav and not more and not less. If the chafina is only done once, and you don't have to redo the chafina again when you go inside, so you don't have to take over another Kohen Gadol's handful, then tibayalach. Then you have a question. Maybe you could rely on the mitzvah of the chafina of the previous Kohen Gadol that was already done, and you just have to bring it into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, the Gemara brings where this Ibaya was asked and how it was resolved. The question was asked regarding the mitzvah of chafina. Chayfen, v'chayze, v'chayfen, aylai. Do you do the chafina once outside to gather the handful to take into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and then you have to take it back into your handful before you put it from there into the fire? Or no, once it's in the ladle, you bring it inside and you pour it directly from the ladle into the fire? That was the question that was asked. And as the Rishonim explained, the basis of this question, as we learned in the beginning of the Perek, really the Kohen should be walking in with the ketores in his hands, in the handful, not in a ladle, in the kaf. It doesn't say that in the pasuk clearly. However, because technically it's impossible to walk in with your hands occupied holding the ketores, and you have to also have the machta, so therefore you put it into a kaf. But the question though is, since it's supposed to be in your hands in a handful, once you come inside and you put down that machta of the fire, do you now have to put the ketores back into your handful to do it the way it was intended, the way it says in the Torah, mulay chafnov, and from there pour it into the fire? Or no, now that we see that technically you must take it in with a kaf, there's no other way to bring it in, you already did the chafina in the beginning, once you put it into the kaf, you can leave it in the kaf and then pour it directly from the kaf into the fire. So Tashema, I'll bring you a rai from the following braisa where it says clearly, first the Gemara tries to bring a rai from our Mishnah, and then we'll bring a braisa which says clearly. So it said in the Mishnah, kach hoisa midasa. This is the measure of how it was done. After the Mishnah says the halach of the chafina, a large chafina for a large hands of a Kohen Gadol, and a smaller for a smaller hands of a Kohen Gadol, then it says kach hoisa midasa. This was the measure. What's the Mishnah adding? My love, don't you think it means to say, kishem shemidasa mibachutz, just like you have this handful on the outside, kach midasa, so too you have the same measure of the handful mibafnim, when you come inside and you do the chafina again. So this Mishnah is saying that the chafina is done a second time. So the Gemara says, Loi, this is not a raya, as we've already said this before in the beginning of the Perek. Dilma, perhaps, what the Mishnah means to say is, Shem ratza lasis mida isa, that if you want to make a keli that's going to be the size of your handful, you don't have to actually use your handful. You can use a keli which is the same size as your handful. Maybe that's what the Mishnah is saying. Inami, or maybe another pshat, what the Mishnah is clarifying is, Shala yechzar v'shala yaisid. It has to be exactly your handful, not less and not more. But not necessarily is it coming to say that you have to do the mitzvah of chafina a second time. So that's not a raya. Now the Gemara brings a braisa, Toshama. We learned in a braisa, it says, Keitzad hu oise, how does the Kohen Gadol do the chafina a second time inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim? So this is complicated. Because he wants to get the ketores, which is in this kaf, back into his hands. How is he going to do it? If he wants to create his hands by putting them together, to do the hold his hands together to create this handful, how is he going to get that now from the kaf into his hands if his hands are being held together? So the Braisa describes exactly how this is done. So you have your hands held together like in a cup for the handful, and you place the bazach, which is the kaf, this ladle, on top of the tips of the fingers as it is in a position of a cup and a handful. And then what do you do? And others say that he holds it with his teeth. And now what does the person do? And now he's going to push forward the bazach, the kaf, that is, which is on the tip of his fingers. He's going to push it forward towards himself. Right, so you have the ladle, which is on the tip of his fingers, and you have the handle of the ladle, which sticks out towards his body, and he's going to push it. He's going to push the handle of the ladle towards himself, until it's going to reach to his elbows, because what the Kohen Gadol does is he brings his elbows together so he can hold the handle of the ladle in his elbows. And then and then with his thumbs, he tips it over. Now he's going to have the kaf right above the cup of his handful, and he's going to tip it over with his thumbs into his hands. That's how it's done. Okay, I'm not sure if it's possible to describe verbally without seeing a picture. I'll try to post a picture so you can see what this is. So here you see clearly that this was done again inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The way it was maneuvered, that he should, while his hands are being held together, with his thumb, he maneuvers the handle of this ladle to tip it over into his hands. And then what does he do? V'tsoivra. Then he, from his handful, he pours it into the pan of the coals, and he heaps it, pours it together and heaps it, kidei sheyehei oshna shoya lavai, so that it should take some time for the smoke to come out. V'yesh others say no, mefazra, he scatters it around in the pan, in that shovel where the coals are, kidei sheyehei oshna memaheres lavai, so that the smoke should come out quickly. V'zu hi avayde kasha shebemikdash. To do this chafina inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, while he's holding his hands together, to maneuver with his fingers the ladle, to tip it over into his hands, this is a difficult avayde in the Beis HaMikdash. Now the Gemara asks on this expression, Zuhi, V'su loi, this is the only difficult avayde and there's no other. But Vayike Melike, regarding Melike, it also says it's a difficult avayde. Vayike Kemitze is a difficult avayde when it's done from the marcheshes and the machvas once it's already fried. So the Gemara says, Zuhi, avayde kasha me avaydes kasha shebemikdash. This is one of the difficult avaydes in the Beis HaMikdash. So Shma Mina, here we have a clear brayso that says, Chayfin, v'chayzer, v'chayfin. The chafin is done once outside to gather the ketayres, placed into the kaf, and then when you come into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it has to be poured back from the kaf into his handfuls. That's what we see, you do a chafin a second time. Shma Mina. Now we come back to what was mentioned before regarding a Kohen Gadol that shechted his par, and then he passed away. Could this next Kohen Gadol that's taking him over use the blood to spray inside and on the Mizbeach, or does he have to shecht over a new par? Shachat meis, the Kohen Gadol shechted his par and he passed away. Ma'u she'yikonis acher bedomai, does the second Kohen Gadol take him over, use this blood to go inside and spray it? Me, Amrinan, do I say bepar? When the Torah says that the Kohen Gadol should come in with bepar ben bakar, does par mean that vafila bedomai shall par, even after it was shechted, and you only have the blood of the par? That also is included in the meaning of the word par. Par could also refer after the shechita, just the blood. And therefore he doesn't have to shecht over again a live par. Or maybe bepar means you have to have your own live bull, v'loy bedomai shel par. You can't take over after it was shechted just the blood of the previous Kohen Gadol's par. So the Gemara brings an argument about this. Rab Chanina oime bepar v'loy bedomai shel par. You have to have the bull itself and not its blood. V'reish Lakish says bepar v'afila bedomai shel par. You can use even the blood as well. When the Torah says par, it's even after the shechita, just the blood. Rabbi Yoma, the argument was also between the following Amiroim. Rabbi Ami said, Bepar, v'loy bedomai shel par, not the blood. Rabbi Yitzchak said, Bepar, v'afile bedomai shel par. When the Torah says par, that includes even using the par after the shechita, you have the blood of the par. So the Gemara asks two questions on this opinion. Eis for Rabbi Ami Rabbi Yitzchak. So Rabbi Ami asked Rabbi Yitzchak, Nafche, Nimnin, this is a halacha regarding the Korban Pesach. By the Korban Pesach it says that there's a seh. The Torah uses the term seh, a lamb, and you have to be counted on this lamb in order to be able to eat from it. But it says in the Mishnah, Nimnin, you could be counted on this lamb, Umayshchin Yedeyim, and then you could remove yourself to not be counted in this group, Mimenu, from it, Ad Sheyishchet, until the time that it's shechted. Because once it's shechted, so it's not a lamb anymore. The Torah is saying, the full pasuk is Vim yimat habayis mihiyos miseh v'lakachu shchena karav al beisai. That when it's still alive as a seh, so then you could be counted on it, you could be removed of it. But after it was shechted, it's not a seh anymore. Now it's shechted, so you can't be counted on it, or you can't be removed of it. If what you said before is true, that when the Torah uses the term par, it does include even a par after shechita, just using the blood of the par. So say the same thing over here. Achi yizarik mi bayale. That even after the seh was shechted and you have the blood of the seh, it's also still the seh. Just like the par is the par, even just the blood of the par after it was shechted. Say the same thing over here, that the Torah is giving you the option to be counted or to be removed of it even after it was shechted. So the Gemara answers, no, there it's different. Shani Hassam, over there by the case of the seh, it's different. The chsiv mihiyos miseh. The Torah says from being a seh, and we darshan it to mean mihiyusa the seh, from the seh when it's alive. Only a living seh is what you could be removing yourself from, but not after it was shechted. Masav Marzutra asked a question regarding the mitzvah of petach hamor, a donkey that has to be redeemed with a seh, also with a lamb. So the Braisa says, Ein poidin, it cannot be redeemed, loy begel, not with a calf, loy bechaya, not with an undomesticated animal, loy b'shchuta, not after it was shechted. The Torah writes has to be a seh, so it can't be shechted. That's what we're going to be focusing on. V'loy b'treifa, not if it's a treifa, can't live for 12 months. V'loy b'kalayim, not if it was crossbreeded, as Rashi says, an A's with a rachel, even though it's still a seh, but it's kalayim. V'loy b'koi, which in the opinion that Rashi brings here is also a kind of kalayim. Ela b'seh. It has to be a seh. So this Braisa is clearly saying that when the Torah uses the term seh, it excludes a shchuta. After it's shechted, it doesn't mean a seh. So why don't we say the same thing before regarding the par? When the Torah says the kohen has to come in with a par, it has to be a living par, not after it's shechted. So this is a question of Rabbi Yitzchak Nafch's opinion. So again, the Gemara says, Shani Hasam, the case by Petach HaMor, when the Torah says to use a seh, it's different. The Yalef says seh mi Pesach. We compare the expression of seh that it says by Pesach, and there it says mihiyos mi seh, that it has to be alive, and the same thing is also by the Pidyon Petach HaMor, and the Torah says seh, that it has to be a living lamb, a living seh. Ima la halon, so the Gemara says, wait a minute, if you're making this gzeira shava, if so, ima la halon zochar tam u ben shana. By a korban Pesach, it has to be a male, it has to be without any blemish, and it has to be only up to 1 year old. Afkan zochar tam u ben shana. Does that mean that the Pidyon Petach HaMor must be done with a seh, which is also a zochar tam and a ben shana? Talmud loymar tifte riba. The Torah uses the expression of tifte twice, that you could redeem even if it's not a zachar, not a tam, or not a ben shana. Says the Gemara, eat tifta riba. If the Torah says twice tifta to add that you can use any other kind of seh, afilu kulu nami, does that mean you could use any kind of seh, including even after if it's a treif or a shchuta and so on? So the Gemara says, no. Im kain seh mayahanile. This gzeira shava of seh, for what purpose would it? What would it be teaching me? So we have the gzeira shava to come and teach me that it has to be a seh that's alive, and we have all the things that I mentioned, not an egel, not a chaya, not a shchuta, not a treif, and so on. So therefore we have that gzeira shava. Therefore it's not a question in Rabbi Yitzchak Nafch's opinion. The Gemara is going to ask now questions on the next opinion, as we'll see in Mitzvah Shem on Daf Nun.